So the idea around xCloud is, of course, that you can take your Xbox games or your PC games and take them on the go with you by playing on something you already carry around all the time anyway. That's your cell phone. But the problem we run into with that are the controls. There aren't any physical buttons or anything you would use. Definitely nothing like what you'd be using at home with, say, an Xbox controller, nothing like that. So we're seeing more and more devices come out to try to give you that at-home experience while still just using your cell phone, clips for Xbox controllers, or even full wraparound controllers like this one. This is the Razer Kishi, and Microsoft sent it over for me to take a look at alongside of xCloud, and I thought it'd be pretty interesting to see this because this is a collaboration between Razer, Microsoft, and Gamevice. Remember them? Now, alongside of the Razer Kishi, they also sent over a Note 20, which would be a newer phone, of course, that people may have picked up recently to try with it, as well as a 1-year pass for Game Pass Ultimate. I already subscribed to it though, so what I'll do is later in the video, I'll just put it up on screen, and whoever manages to get it gets it. It'll just be a nice little bonus to the video, guys. So if you enjoy the video, make sure you hit the like button down below and subscribe if you are new here. So let's go ahead and unbox the Razer Kishi to get started. Now, the Razer Kishi is currently on Amazon for $79.99, and it is Prime shipped, so should get to you relatively quickly. This is set up, of course, for xCloud in particular, as it has a little Xbox button here that would act as your guide button, of course. It's also set up in that asymmetrical stick layout, and it has the typical button layout you would expect for your Xbox games at home. The box is pretty sturdy. It has, of course, the Razer green on black look, and for the most part, it's a pretty solid packaging. Now inside, you're greeted with the Razer Kishi itself. They have some foam padding here to help it so it doesn't go flying around inside. So at least they had some thought put into the packaging itself. But once you lift this out, there's really not too much else in there. Oh, there's a little 14-day pass for Game Pass Ultimate. So there you go. You guys are getting 2 passes here. This is just the code, so go ahead and pause the video. You can go ahead and try to pop that in. And then we get some stickers for Razer, so that's always fun. Now, the idea with the Razer Kishi is it can essentially fold up. So it has a locked closed position and then an unlocked open position, which we can go ahead and pop this big Game Pass logo up, and that allows it to expand. So I guess you would be able to carry around with a much more compact design when it's closed up, and then you open it up, put your phone in here, and it can also expand if your phone is a little larger. The Note 20, for example, does need this to be expanded a bit because it is a larger phone. I do wonder if this is, just like this, small enough for people to carry around. It's not bad. It certainly has a smaller profile than a normal Xbox controller, but it's not as small as something like that 8BitDo SN30 that we looked at, so keep that in mind. The buttons feel pretty solid. They are not at all tactile, nothing like that. They have more of a mushy feel to them, similar to, I guess, that SN30 that we just looked at recently, so not bad there on the buttons. The sticks feel good. They're full analog sticks. They, of course, click in as well. Feel very similar to like the Xbox One joysticks. That's pretty good. We, of course, have our typical Xbox buttons here that are all tactile, as well as our guide button. The D-pad is also kind of mushy. I don't know how good this will be in practice. I mean, it's there. I'm sure it works fine, but it does not feel amazing. Nothing like that 8BitDo controller we had, which felt a lot better. At the top, we have R1, R2, L1, L2. R2 and L2 appear to be analog triggers, so that's good for anyone who wants to play something like Forza on the go. It'll make it a lot more usable. Now, this does require a USB Type-C phone for charging right here and communication. Charging will take place down here. There's a little port will pass through, so you can plug your power cable into this and it will start to charge your phone. Good to know that you don't have to rush trying to get your phone out of here into the wall if it starts to die. You just kind of plug this in here, which that's a nice touch. All right, so let's go ahead and play some xCloud games on this. I'm about 15 feet from the router now, so it's not too bad. And it looks like what I would go with is you just plug it in right here, of course, the USB-C, and it should see it just like that. And then we can take this and we can kind of stretch this out and over this side. And there we are. It has kind of foam on either side here. So it feels very, very solid right now. Like there's no real give or flex to it, of course. Your phone should hold it up. And it does get some added weight from your phone. Here is a Switch Lite for comparison. You can see for anyway using the Note 20, my hands are pretty far apart compared to something like the Switch Lite. So keep that in mind. Depending on how large your phone is, your hands will end up kind of far apart when you're playing. Now, they did recently add Destiny 2 to Game Pass for cloud gaming. So why don't we start with that one? We'll jump in there. It's a weird experience, I think, think, to be able to play Destiny 2 on the go, but let's see how it does. All right, so now I'm running around in Destiny 2, and as I said before, I ran into that issue with Halo, where we were doing a test with xCloud and that SN30 Pro, and I noticed that I always felt a little behind with xCloud when I was playing shooters. Shooters in particular are the ones that seem to get me. Others like racing games I think are manageable, but like shooters, I just feel a little behind when I'm playing. And I think it's just the latency in xCloud, but it's also the fact, like, for example, this one, I feel it more so than other games, is because it is running at 30 frames. So I believe when xCloud gets to that point, it's gonna make a big, big difference. But it is surreal, I will say, to be playing something like Destiny 2 on the go, on a cell phone with actual controls. You know what, I think it's manageable. And like I said, it can only get better when they start upping the frame rate and all of that, so hey, not a bad start for the Razer Kishi. Pretty good game, I think, to take advantage of it. Now we're gonna move over to a game that is 60 frames per second, is a 2D platformer, and is one of the best games released this year, and that is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. And that is a good test, I would say, for the D-pad here, which, like I said, feels kind of mushy. It's not my favorite feeling D-pad, that's for sure, but I kind of prefer it over the tactile feeling of the Xbox One D-pad. So I guess there's that. I would say it's better than the Xbox One D-pad just because of that, right? Where it's not this loud clicking D-pad. I can press down and I feel like I'm hitting multiple directions, but it at least feels manageable. Like I don't feel like I'm at a massive disadvantage using this D-pad, for example, but it's not as good as the SN30 Pro. So keep that in mind. It's serviceable at best, I'd say, on the D-pad side. Now we're gonna move over to a game that will take advantage of the analog triggers, and that would be Forza Horizon 4. We can see it right here. And something I forgot to mention with the speakers. Now we can see this is enclosed right here on either side, and a lot of times your speaker for your phone is either on the back, which is completely exposed here, or the bottom. What they decided to do is put these little kind of holes here and here, and that way it reroutes the sound around and actually points it at you, which is nice because when I was listening to it, it's pretty loud. Like, it reroutes it really well at you. So you can see here, it has good volume despite being kind of enclosed in either side of the controller. So not bad there. So let's talk about these analog triggers. Now, of course, because they're analog triggers, you can kind of press slowly and you'll get that feathered throttle effect, or you can absolutely crush it and just go flying, right? That is all there. The full range works fine in xCloud, something like Forza Horizon 4. Now, I did notice something. When I'm pressing them, it has this weird, I don't know if it's like this grinding noise. I'm not really sure, but if I hold it up here to the microphone, you might be able to hear it a bit better. Now that is something you hear every time you press it down. You kind of feel it a little bit too. I don't know if it actually is like pressing against something and it's rubbing against it, making that kind of plastic grinding noise. It's very strange, but they have some tension to them. It's not as much tension as what's with the Xbox One controller, but it's enough so that it feels like it's a quality analog trigger. The thing that's throwing me off is that rubbing noise. Maybe over time it gets broken in and it goes away because of like new plastic pieces or something from manufacturing. It's just an odd thing that I noticed, so I'll keep an eye on that, I guess, as I use that in the coming months. Now, my question I have with a lot of these devices that clip on or have your phone and have something clipped to it, can you still use your phone if you get a phone call? Although no one really talks on the phone anymore, do they? So can you still use your phone if somebody texts you or something? And I mean, it's all there. You would just look like this trying to do it. So, I mean, yeah, technically, yes. You can still text. You can still... I can still take pictures. The camera's over here. It kind of depends on where, obviously, that is on your phone. But yeah, I mean, you could still use it. You just might look a bit ridiculous with these controller pieces hanging off. I guess you could technically talk on the phone, but it's also going to depend on where your microphone and your earpiece is and all of that as well. So the fact that it at least leaves everything exposed on the front here, yes, it is still usable. Although I don't think a case, depending on which one you have, would fit in here. It does grab the phone fairly tight. So that would mean if you want to pop your phone in here, you'd probably have to take the case off as well. And that does seem like a fairly large inconvenience. I know it's going to be hard for them to account for all the different cases that are out there. I mean, you look on Amazon, there's like, what, thousands of cases, but it is something to keep in mind with this. If you have a case, even if it's a fairly small, thin case that wraps around it, you might still have to take that off just to fit this into the Razer Kishi. All right, now let's take this Razer Kishi apart, take a look inside. It's a bit odd because it looks like there's just, I guess, two sides to it, of course, attached right in the middle here with this band and the Game Pass logo on the side there. They are using tri-wing screws on the bottom, probably because they wanted to annoy me, but we should be able to get a few of these off and get our first look at this D-pad. With those screws removed and a few clips kind of popped up because they decided to also clip it together, we can, oh, it's a little cable running there. There we go. We can get this guy apart here. Now I will have to unclip this because they do still have to attach them. It is running through, remember, one USB port on the side when it plugs in. So they still needed to come up with a way to do that. And what they did was they just ran a cable through the band here and then it comes around and I'm sure it attaches on the other side there. So that does have at least something running between them connecting. Now in order to make sure that cable doesn't snag, it looks like they have plenty of slack here along with these two springs and you can see it just kind of pulls it along. So they at least thought of that and it would have stopped by now. I'm pulling it beyond what it would have clipped here. So that way that cable doesn't get ripped despite you kind of going into the open and close position several times. Now this is the main side that I'm most interested in because it has that D-pad there. Of course it has the full stick and it has our analog trigger here, which does seem to have its own spot right at the top. So we'll have to take that off. All right, there we go. Only 4 screws, 2 silver at the top. And then we have 2 of the black screws at the bottom there to hold the board in along with the analog trigger. You should be able to flip this over and take a look at it. And we also have our analog stick. It looks very similar to a standard Xbox One analog stick here. Nothing crazy. It is, I mean, it's a full analog stick, so that's nice to have that on the go for shooters like we were doing with Destiny. Now on the D-pad, they did put these pads pretty far apart here. They also labeled them up, left, right, down, which is nice. But unfortunately, I guess the membrane they went with or something, it feels just so mushy compared to other D-pads. And the D-pad itself is pretty large. I mean, you can see from the side, that is a big D-pad. It has to drop down pretty far, and maybe that has something to do with it as well. And they also put a fairly decent spike in the middle here. It doesn't feel great when you're using it compared to some other D-pads, but like I said, it should be at least serviceable for these xCloud games. Now, as for the analog triggers, this is of course L2. The way they make that work in a lower profile controller like this is you see this little spot here, it's L. You can see it rotate as I press down. So it has different degrees of movement you can see here, and they have a little piece of plastic I can see right in here rotating as I press down. So what's happening is it can tell how far I'm pressing using that, and that might also be where that grinding noise is kind of coming from. When I press down on it, that it feels like it's, like I said, rubbing against something in there. Maybe over time, as I press it, it will maybe get to the point where it's shaved down on one side and it won't be making contact anymore. But not a bad way to get an analog trigger into that Razer Kishi controller that's trying to keep it lower profile all the way around. I will point out the board itself is pretty flimsy, fairly thin, so it's not the best built motherboard, I will say that, inside of this controller. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for the Razer Kishi controller for your Android device and xCloud. Now, you have to decide if this is worth $80 to you, considering a clip is $15, and if you already have the Xbox controller, you're good to go. I do like the form factor though with this style where the controls are on either side of the phone and it's directly in the middle. Feels much more sturdy. Think of like the original Game Boy Advance versus the SP. That's kind of the way I look at this. This versus like a clip that has your phone just kind of hanging at the top there. The strong points of this controller would be the full analog sticks that are very similar to an Xbox One controller, and even the front-facing A, B, X, and Y, with probably the weakest point of this being its D-pad. And the analog triggers aren't bad if it wasn't for the noise that they make. But let me know what you guys think about the Razer Kishi controller down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.